You know, the story of America is kind of a paradox, isn't it? It's this grand, beautiful idea that's constantly at war with its own messy reality. It's a story of these incredible promises and some really deep contradictions. So let's dive into that tension and explore the moments that have defined and nearly broken the nation.
It really all starts with this one big idea: American exceptionalism. This is the belief that the United States isn't just another country on the map. No, it's something different, something unique, with a special destiny to fulfill in the world. And that idea has been an incredibly powerful engine throughout American history.
And well, if you believe you're special, what's the next logical step? You grow. That core belief in being exceptional directly fueled expansionism, the idea that the nation wasn't just meant to exist, but to get bigger, to push its borders and spread its influence.
And eventually, this all got wrapped up in a new name, Manifest Destiny. Now, what's really wild is the language they used. It wasn't just about grabbing more land. No, it was framed as this divine mission, a grand, peaceful conquest. Can you believe that? The goal was to settle a promised land that stretched from coast to coast. For a young country, that was an incredibly potent and optimistic vision.
But that optimistic vision of a unified destiny, it was heading straight for a brick wall. See, the dream of a peaceful expansion just couldn't paver over this deep, fatal flaw that was literally tearing the country in two.
In the years leading up to the Civil War, Senator William H. Seward put it perfectly. He looked at the growing divide between the North and the South and called it, with these three chilling words, an irrepressible conflict. He knew this wasn't some political disagreement you could just debate and compromise on. It was an unavoidable collision.
And here's exactly why he was right. This went so much deeper than politics. The industrial North and the plantation South, they were basically becoming two different countries. They had completely different economies, totally different social structures, and clashing values, and it all revolved around the institution of slavery.
But here's where it gets really complicated, and it's so important to understand this. The great abolitionist Frederick Douglass pointed out that the whole free soil movement in the North wasn't always about what you'd think. For a lot of people, the cry for free men wasn't about extending liberty to black people, but about protecting the jobs and the liberty of white workers from the competition of slave labor. It's a really complex and uncomfortable truth.
All right, so decades after the nation somehow survived that Civil War, it faced a totally new kind of internal crisis. This time, the enemy wasn't an opposing army. It was a complete and utter economic failure that would test the country in a whole new way.
It all started right here. Just look at this chart. It's like a roller coaster, right? You see the dizzying highs of the roaring 20s stock market, and then, boom, the floor just completely drops out in October 1929. The party was officially and violently over.
And the scale of this loss, it's just staggering. $179 billion. To put that into perspective for you, the entire U.S. federal budget in 1932 was just a little over $4 billion. The value that just vanished from the stock market was more than 40 times that amount. This wasn't just numbers on a page. This was the savings, the fortunes, the futures of millions of families just gone.
And the crash didn't stay on Wall Street, not by a long shot. As you can see here, the panic spread like a virus. It set off this devastating chain reaction. First, the banks started to fail. Look at that, 4,000 of them gone in a single year. Then, with no banks to lend money and no customers who could afford to buy anything, businesses collapsed by the tens of thousands. The whole economic engine of the country just seized up.
And this graph, this is what all those other numbers really mean. This is the human cost. Unemployment went from about 3% in 1929 to an unbelievable 25% by 1933. Think about that. 1 in every 4 working people was suddenly jobless. The American dream of prosperity had turned into an absolute nightmare. And the strain on the country's social fabric was just immense. For the first time in American history, the birth rate actually fell below the replacement level. Families just shattered. We're talking hundreds of thousands of kids left to wander the country on their own. This wasn't just an economic depression, it was a deep, deep social and psychological trauma.
So you have the Civil War and the Great Depression, these massive, seismic events. But here's the thing. The fight to make America live up to its founding ideals wasn't just confined to these big moments. In reality, it's been a long, continuous, and frankly unfinished struggle.
Just look at this timeline. You can basically draw a straight line through American history connecting these movements, from the abolitionists fighting to end slavery, to the suffragettes demanding the right to vote, to the civil rights movement, second-wave feminism, and right up to modern movements like Black Lives Matter. They are all chapters in the very same book, a long, multi-generational fight to make the words liberty and justice for all actually mean what they say, for everyone.
Which brings us to our final battleground, and maybe the most complicated one of all, the battle over the story itself. Because how we choose to remember our past has a huge impact on our present and our future.
Think about this. For almost 100 years, the public's main understanding of Reconstruction, that supercritical period right after the Civil War, didn't come from history books. Nope. It came from huge blockbuster movies that romanticized the Old South and basically painted the first attempt at an interracial democracy as a total disaster.
And this quote right here just nails the problem. What historians have figured out from digging through evidence and what the general public believes to be true can often be two completely different things. And that gap makes it almost impossible to have a real productive conversation about our own history.
So we're left with this big question, aren't we? The American story isn't some old book sitting on a shelf collecting dust. It's a living, breathing debate. It's a constant reevaluation of the country's promises and its failures. And if the story of who we were is always changing, always being fought over, what does that tell us about who we are today and who we're trying to become tomorrow?